Mrs. T,
And I'm Mrs. Dole, and
and we
we're
are
reading
reading
Chapter 3 of Mysteries According to Humphrey.
The Case of the Mystifying Mr. E. After Mrs. Wright left, Mr. E said, "We've had enough basketball for today, but if I'm here again tomorrow, we're going to have a word war." My friends seemed excited about that, but I was worried. Wasn't Mrs. Brisbane coming back tomorrow? Where was she? What was wrong? I had no clue. I was ready for a nap, but right away Mr. E started another game called Who's Missing. First, he picked Daniel to sit with his back to the classroom. Then all the other students had to run around and switch places at their tables except for one. He silently led forgetful Phoebe to the cloakroom to hide. Next, Daniel had to turn back and guess who was missing. It was a lot harder than it sounds, but he guessed Phoebe on the third try, which was a good thing since Mr. E only gave him 3 tries. The class played the game over and over because everybody wanted a chance to be the guesser. I got drowsy after a while and went into my sleeping hut for a nap. And you know what? No one even noticed that I was missing. I know because I always wake up when I hear my name. When I came out again, my classmates were begging Mr. E to read to them. He smiled and said, "Okay." He reached into his big bag and pulled out a book. "No! Stop talking," Sophie said. "We want Sherlock Holmes." "It's the red book on the desk. Hurry up," Harry said. "Mrs. Brisbane's reading us the story, The Red-Headed League." Mr. E made a face. "That's too serious. My book is a lot more fun." "Sherlock Holmes, please," Tall Paul and Small Paul both said. Soon all my friends were saying, "Sherlock Holmes! Sherlock Holmes!" But Mr. E sat down and opened his book. "Can you hear us? We really want Sherlock Holmes." I squeaked so hard my whiskers wiggled and my ears jiggled. Even Og agreed. Boing, boing! But Mr. E went right ahead and read us jokes from his big joke book. I like jokes a lot, really, I do. I especially like this one. Why are frogs so happy? Because they eat whatever bugs them. I thought Og would like that one. Mr. E's jokes were funny. At least in the beginning, they were funny. Like this one. Where do you put a sick insect? In an ambulance. My friends laughed hysterically. I chuckled too, but after a while I started worrying about Mrs. Brisbane again. Then I couldn't laugh at all. Finally, the laughter got quieter and quieter. Too helpful Holly yawned and raised her hand. "Now could you read from the Sherlock Holmes book?" she asked. "It's a mystery." Mr. E chuckled. "Why do you need Sherlock Holmes? I'm Mr. E." The mystery about Mr. E was this. When was he going to teach us anything?
Lunchtime came at last, and the classroom was quiet again, which was a relief. Then the door opened, and something wonderful happened. Miss Mack walked in. Miss Mack was the substitute teacher who brought me from Petarama, my first home, if you can call it that, to room 26 of Longfellow School. But later, Miss Brisbane came back, and Miss Mack left, and my heart was broken. Now Miss Mack was a full-time teacher at Longfellow School, but in another classroom. Of course, I love Miss Brisbane too. If I could have one wish come true, it would be that Miss Mack and Miss Brisbane could both be my teachers at the same time. "Hi," Miss Mack was smiling. "I'm Morgan McNamara from first grade." Our substitute teacher shook her hand. "I'm Eddie Edinopoulos, but the children call me Mr. E." Miss Mack smiled her big, beautiful smile. "I'm sure they like that. I subbed for Miss Brisbane last year, and if you need anything, just ask. Have you found her lesson plans?" No, not yet," he said. Miss Mack opened one of Mrs. Brisbane's desk drawers. "She keeps them in here, in this binder. Mrs. Brisbane always has very good, thorough lesson plans." "Great," said Mr. E. "I've been getting to know the kids. You know, having a little fun." "I just heard she might be out for a while," Miss Mack told him. "She really worries about her students when she's not there." That was nice to hear, because, to squeak the truth, I was really worried about Mrs. Brisbane. "If you have any questions, I'm right down the hall," Miss Mack said. "Thanks," Mr. E said. Of course, Miss Mac wouldn't leave room 26 without saying hello to Og and me. She came over to our table by the window. "How's it going, Humphrey, you handsome hamster?" she asked. No wonder I loved Miss Mac. I scurried over to the side of my cage so I could get a closer look at her. "It's been a strange day," I replied. "Where is Mrs. Brisbane?" "I know you miss Mrs. Brisbane," she said. Then she turned to Og. "And how's my favorite frog today?" Og leaped into the water side of his tank and splashed loudly, which made Miss Mac laugh. I loved to hear her laugh. "I've got to eat," she said, turning back to Mr. E. "Can I show you where the lunchroom is?" "Sure, thanks," he said, following her out the door.
I rarely leave my cage during the day because it's just too risky. However, this was an emergency. So while we were alone, I jiggled the lock on my cage and scurried over to Og's tank. I'm so lucky to have a lock that doesn't lock. Humans always think it's fastened tight, but I know how to jiggle it opened. "Og," I squeaked, "something's wrong." "Boing, boing," he said. Then he dived from the land side of his tank to the water side. I had to scramble to stay dry. Hamsters should never get wet. Once he stopped splashing, I went back to the tank and said, "Mrs. Brisbane wouldn't miss school unless something was terribly wrong." And Miss Mac said she might be out for a while. Miss Mac always tells the truth, right? Og splashed frantically again and again. And again I scrambled for a dry spot. "Og, if you could splash a little less, I'd appreciate it," I told him, "although I know you are a frog and frogs do splash." He must have understood because he stopped. "Sherlock Holmes always looks for clues," I said, "so keep your eyes open, okay?" I felt terrible as soon as I said it because Og doesn't have any ears that I can see anyway. I glanced up at the clock. I didn't have much time before the class returned from lunch. "Oh, and by the way, I don't think you're an it," I said as I headed back to my cage, "and I know you don't think I'm a rat." "Boing, boing, boing," Og twanged. I managed to pull the cage door behind me just as my friends returned to their desks.
The afternoon went pretty much like the morning. There was no math ball, but Mr. E pulled out 3 smaller balls from his big sack and juggled them. Yes, he juggled. It was quite amazing to see him toss the balls into the air and keep them going. Mrs. Brisbane had certainly never done that. It made my brain whirl when I tried to keep my eyes on the balls. Then Mr. E let my friends try juggling. Harry couldn't keep even one ball in the air, but he didn't seem too upset about that. Next, it was Thomas's turn. "You should see my dad juggle. He could juggle 15 balls at a time," he said. Mr. E looked amazed. "And knives, too. He can juggle knives," Thomas added. "And baseball bats." Juggling large sharp objects sounded downright dangerous. I heard Rolling Rosie say, "Give me a break." Just Joey rolled his eyes. Thomas managed to juggle the balls a few seconds, but then he dropped them and they rolled across the classroom. "Perhaps your dad could give you some pointers," Mr. E said. Phoebe caught the balls on her first try, but then dropped them. When Daniel tried, he managed to keep 2 of the balls going for a few seconds. It looked like fun, but I couldn't help thinking about Mrs. Brisbane. She'd be teaching us something interesting about the clouds or the ancient Egyptians or reading something wonderful like Sherlock Holmes. And here we were, going through an entire afternoon without learning anything except how to juggle.
Near the end of the day, when Mr. E finally stopped juggling, helpful Holly raised her hand. "It's time to take care of Humphrey and Og," she said. "They need to be fed, and Humphrey needs fresh water. Tomorrow he gets his cage cleaned." "I don't know how to do those things," Mr. E said. Holly explained that the students took turns at the job. This week, it was Phoebe's turn to look after me and Harry's turn to look after Og. When Harry threw some froggy food sticks into the tank, Og made a huge, splashy leap to get them. I could tell my friends were impressed. Mr. E was impressed too. "He's quite a jumper." "That's nothing," Thomas said. "Once I saw Og leap up out of his tank and land all the way on Mrs. Brisbane's desk." Some of my friends laughed. "That didn't happen," Simon said. "You're exaggerating," Holly said. Thomas just shook his head. "I know what I saw," he told them. I'd seen Og pop the top of his tank a few times, but I'd never seen him leap to Mrs. Brisbane's desk. Phoebe gave me fresh water, which tasted much better than the old water in my bottle. "Oh no," Phoebe suddenly said. "Mrs. Brisbane always brings fresh veggies for Humphrey." "Yes, she does, and I look forward to them. I always have Nutri-Nibbles and Mighty Mealworms, but there's nothing as crunchy and munchy as fresh veggies. In fact, I hid them in my cheek pouch and in my bedding, but the cage cleaner always finds them and takes them away." "You don't have any?" Mr. E asked. Phoebe looked worried as she shook her head. "I do," a voice called out. Thomas rummaged through his backpack. "I didn't eat my carrot sticks," he said. "Humphrey can have them. I don't like them." I was extremely grateful to Thomas, though why anyone wouldn't like carrot sticks is a mystery to me. My friends take very good care of me.
At the end of the day, helpful Holly raised her hand again. "We need our homework assignment," she said. A lot of the other students tried to shush her, but Holly was determined. "Mrs. Brisbane always gives us homework." Mr. E replied that he had a big surprise for the class. The only homework assignment was to bring in a riddle or a joke for the next day. "You don't even have to write it down," he said. Then he tapped the finger on the side of his head. "Just remember it up here." It was a pretty strange homework assignment, but then it had been a pretty strange day. When the bell rang, my friends all looked happy as they left the class. "Bye, Mr. E," Thomas said on his way out of class. "See you tomorrow." "Bye, Momamas," Mr. E said. I thought he was mixed up until I remembered that name song. I heard Hurry Up Harry tell Slow Down Simon, "Pretty sweet, no homework." "Mr. E is a great teacher," Simon said. "He's so funny," Kelsey told Rosie. After the students had left, Mr. E sighed a big sigh and said, "That went well." He strolled over to the table by the window where Og and I live. "I think they liked me." "Yes, yes, yes," I shouted. "And they like Miss Brisbane, too." Of course, all he heard was squeak, squeak, squeak. Mr. Morales came into the room. "I'm glad I caught you, Ed," he said. "Are you available to teach tomorrow?" Mr. E said yes. And then the principal said, "I wasn't able to talk to Mrs. Brisbane, but her husband said her lesson plans are in the desk." "Yes, I know," Mr. E said. "Good," Mr. Morales said. "I'll see you tomorrow." The two men shook hands and Mr. Morales left. When the door closed, Mr. E chuckled. "That's good news for me." Then he opened Mrs. Brisbane's desk drawer and took out the binder with the lesson plans in it. Phew. He was finally thinking about teaching his students. I watched him as he turned the pages. Math problems, vocabulary, art projects, science. Wow, she really packs a lot in, he said. "Yes, yes, yes," I agreed. "I don't know about all of this," he said. He turned another page. "And that's not going to work." Og started splashing around in his tank. I was worried too. After all, these were Miss Brisbane's lesson plans, and Mr. E didn't seem to like them. Mr. E closed the binder. "I'm going to have to make these subjects a lot more fun to make this work," he said. "A lot more fun." He was still muttering under his breath when he picked up his bag and left room 26. I had no idea what he was muttering about, and I still had no idea what had happened to Mrs. Brisbane. But I had a bad feeling that it wasn't something good.
Humphrey's Detectionary. A detective without any clues is like a classroom without a real teacher.